Want to show your support for your Philly teams? Check out phillygoat.com. They have all of your needs covered, whether it's Sixers, Flyers, Eagles, Phillies, Union, Philly boxing, Philly culture, or Philly pride. There's something for you. Tees, hoodies, hats, any color you want, any size you want, including kids. Go to phillygoat.com. Use the promo code Jim Montgomery for 10% off your order. That's phillygoat.com. Be sure it has the authentic goat on the sleeve, and use that promo code Jim Montgomery for 10% off of your order. What's up, everyone? Welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast that takes a trip down Philly sports memory lane. I'm your host, Jim Montgomery. Welcome to another great episode. Thank you for being here. Episode number 50. And I was going to do something big and extravagant and crazy for number 50, and then I realized this is just the beginning. So let's just keep our eyes on the prize, and maybe 100 will do something, but 50, yeah, that's great, but we're halfway to 100. Let's get the next 50 under our belts. But again, thank you for all of your support. If it wasn't for you guys listening, obviously I'd be talking to no one, so I truly do appreciate it. Be sure to like and subscribe, tell your friends, just spread the word. We've grown so much in a year, and it's a testament to you guys, and I truly appreciate it, and I truly feel the best is yet to come, that we're just scratching the surface. So thank you for 50 episodes, and today's episode is going to be one of those ones that leaves you a little frustrated, but that's okay, because I feel like so before I get into some things, I feel like there's a generation of Philly fans who just don't know the struggle and don't know the pain. And those are people that started watching. I mean, even if you take the generation that started, maybe were kids in 07 or 08 when the Phillies won, the Eagles were with Andy Reid and not doing so bad. They don't know. And you can even take it back to 2000. From 2000 until today, between the Sixers, the Flyers making runs, the Eagles, there's a generation of fans that just don't know what we older folks, and I feel like the guy, old man yelling at the cloud right now, but it's the truth of the matter is there's a generation of kids out there who don't really know what true Philadelphia fandom is. So I feel like it is my responsibility, and yes, I'm an educator by trade in my day job, so I feel like it ties in perfect, but it's my job to keep that memory alive, because like they always say, like those who don't know the past are doomed to repeat it. Maybe they can learn from our mistakes and maybe we can move on, but we are living, I would say the past 25 years of Philadelphia sports is a hell of a lot better than the 25 that preceded it. But it is my job to make sure you know about that other 25, all you young kids out there. And yes, I'm wagging my finger. If you're only listening and not watching, I'm wagging my finger. But before we get into another one of those episodes today, be sure to check out our friends at 2008 Phils. They have the world's biggest email Phillies newsletter, and the content is just great. I talked about it this morning on This Day in Philly Sports History. The new article that just came out on Trey Turner and the ovation and the way that John wrote it and wove in some of his stuff is just incredible. And like it definitely really got to me, and it's part of where the whole generation, like this generation doesn't know. But I mean, it's well written, and I definitely got caught up in feelings and whatever for it. May have gotten a little misty-eyed following along, thinking about my own relationship with my dad as well as the relationship with my kids. But I digress. Check out 2008 Phils. Wherever you're watching or listening to this, in the description, there is a link. And for a limited time, we've partnered with them. They're giving away a subscription, for a year subscription for 75% off. So it's either $2 a month or you can pay for the whole year for $20, and it's definitely worth it for the content. Like I said, that article yesterday was just phenomenal. But then on top of that, you get the 2008 World Series Championship banner, T-shirt. You get access to the entire catalog and archives of whatever they've been posting, and that includes some of the discussion and chats and things like that. 2008 Phils will follow your Twitter account, which they have a great following. So what that does, if you're trying to grow your brand, you just increase your reach by following him. And his Twitter account anyway is great because of what the content they put out there. And again, it's all for $20 for the year, $2 a month. So be sure to check out that link exclusively for Back to the Future listeners. You will not be disappointed. So check out our friends at 2008 Phils. You heard about the Philly Goat, but I have to say, this is brand new today as I'm recording this. The new Phillies Believe shirt is top notch. So go check them out. It's back to school. Whatever you got to do, go to phillygoat.com. Use the promo code Jim Montgomery for 10% off. All right. Now that all of our words and sponsors are out of the way, time to get back into the meat of this. And like I said, there's that whole generation of Philly fans that don't really know losing. And some of them were alive for this, and I will give them that. But this is the anniversary of one of the worst Sixers trades ever. And we're going to go back to our Back to the Future roots today and talk a little bit more about the what-if aspect of this once we get to the end. If you don't know about our roots, go back, check out the archives. There's 49 other episodes. Definitely worth the listen. But before we get into the nitty-gritty and the details, let's take a trip down Philly sports memory lane and go back to the 2011-2012 Sixers season. And from the time right after the Allen Iverson run, so like 01, 02, actually that next season they got the 4th seed. So let's start with the 03, 04 Sixers. And ultimately they were in what was, I always call it NBA purgatory, where they're like a 6th seed to a 13th seed, where they're not really in a position to make a playoff run. They're one and done. Maybe they get lucky and pull off an upset and then get eliminated, or they're getting a crappy draft pick because they can't. Their lottery odds are too small. The one year was the exception. There was an exception. I'll get it out, and that was 2010. I think it was like they would have had the 6th or 7th pick. Got lucky, pulled the 2nd pick, and ended up drafting Evan Turner, who didn't necessarily really work out in the NBA. But we've talked a lot about Sixers drafts and where they chose guys and who they chose. And honestly, I mean, Evan Turner, the 2010 draft was not necessarily a decent top-heavy draft. I think the only guy they could have gotten, it may have been like DeMarcus Cousins, which would have been a good addition. But, I mean, the consensus was Evan Turner was the number 2 pick in that draft, so they got it right. Like I said, it just was not a strong draft. But, I mean, it is what it is. So you go back to that, even the season before, or I'm sorry, not the season before, the draft, I'll get it right. The timeline, I'm just getting frustrated just thinking about it. So the 2010 draft, we're talking, though, about the 2011-2012 Sixers season. And, again, they were stuck in purgatory leading up to that. They had some good, solid guys, but they just didn't have the guy. So fast forward to that 2011-2012 season, the NBA had a lockout. And they didn't start, I think, until Christmas was the first games. So they ended up, it was a 66-game schedule. And it was the Sixers' actually first winning season since 04-05. And I mean, the East was pretty good that year. They got them to the 8th seed in the Eastern Conference. Not bad at all for a team that had potential. And I know that I said they were in purgatory, but like we had some high hopes because you had guys like Thad Young, you had Evan Turner, you had Andre Iguodala, Drew Holiday was on that team. So you had guys that you could see possibly fitting together. They just were outmanned in the Eastern Conference because they were young, and this is when guys could still I don't think any of the Sixers came right out of high school, but you could still technically come out of high school, and I think that was one of the things that changed during the CBA lockout, or the negotiations for the lockout. But either way, in the 2011-12 season, Sixers were the 8th seed, and they got the number 1 seed Bulls, where the Bulls were good that year. They had Derrick Rose, Joakim Noah, and just they pretty much dominated. I'm pretty sure Derrick Rose won the MVP that year. But game 1, the Sixers lost, but Derrick Rose got hurt in that game. And then Joakim Noah got hurt in that series too and was banged up. They ended up upsetting the Bulls, one of like 3 teams, I think, or maybe 4, because I think it happened this year. So 4 teams, I think, in history have beaten as the 8 seed, have beaten the 1 seed. The Sixers were one of them in 2011, 2012. Now, you had their 2 best players were injured, but goes in the standings. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, nobody's going to say, well, I will, because I'll be here to remind you and just remind you what we had to go through. But for the most part, nobody's going to be like, well, they lost this guy and this guy. Anyway, and then so they made it to the second round. It was the first time they made it there. I think it may have been the 2001-2002 season. So the fact that they made it out of the first round, everybody was, I remember specifically, everybody was excited. Everybody was ready to get all Sixered up. Because, I mean, we're only 10 years removed from the AI-led team that made it to the finals and captivated the city. So, like, we like basketball. Philly's a basketball town just as much as it's a baseball town, just as much as it is a football town and soccer, whatever, or hockey, whatever. So that they played the Celtics, so it's just another cog in that rivalry. It went 7 games, but the Celtics ultimately, excuse me, outmanned the Sixers, and that was the extent of that. Not that I think the Sixers would have ended up doing anything against the Heat that year anyway, but hopes were high. So, like, going into that offseason, like I said, you had players on the team. You had Holiday. You had Iguodala, Thad Young. I forgot Nikola Vucevic was on that team. But they were still in purgatory. But you could almost see the light at the end of the tunnel. Like, they were still getting there. They just needed a main star. And that was the problem. Because you had guys like Holiday, won in Milwaukee, but he was the second fiddle behind Giannis. Iguodala ended up winning and was a key piece of the Warriors teams, but he wasn't the main focus of that. Thad Young and Vucevic, I mean, same thing. Like, they had solid careers, but they weren't the guy. And we talk so much about Allen Iverson never having a sidekick. This team right here was the complete opposite. They didn't have the Batman to the Robin. Where AI was Batman with no Robin, like guys like Drew Holiday, Iguodala, Thad Young, they were Robin without Batman. So the Sixers needed a guy, or else they were going to still be in purgatory. So they needed something big, preferably a big guy even, because they had guards, they had guys that could somewhat shoot, and the league was starting to change somewhat here. So, like, defense was still a pretty key part of what was happening in the NBA. So the Sixers just needed to somehow attract somebody big. Big name, big something. Now, let's take a trip. We're going to go out west now. So we were over here on the East Coast fighting with the Celtics, knocking off the Bulls. Meanwhile, in LA, there's this guy, Andrew Bynum. May have heard of him. He was a high school to NBA center, played for the Lakers, injury prone, but when he was able to play and really put together a season, um, he was phenomenal. So that 2011 season, he put it all together. He missed 6 games at the beginning of the season, but then played every other game. Hands down, had his best year as a pro. almost 19 points a game, almost 12 rebounds, almost 2 blocks. He was an all-star. And did I mention he played with one of the most ferocious competitors in the history of the NBA, not named Michael Jordan? So he had that killer mindset, and that's Kobe Bryant, for those of you who were hanging on my every word. But he won 2 NBA championships. So he had that winning pedigree. He played, he had, even if it was just slightly and it rubbed off, some of the Mamba mentality had to have rubbed off on him. So he, injury prone, but he was starting to rub people in LA the wrong way. And he only had 1 year left on his contract. So fast forward to August 9th, 2012. It was a later game, because I believe I remember watching the Phillies game, and somehow this announcement, it might have came across the scroll or whatever, but there was a 4-team trade involving the Sixers, Lakers, Nuggets, and Magic. The Sixers got Andrew Bynum and Jason Richardson. Lakers pulled Dwight Howard, Chris Duhon, and Earl Clark. The Nuggets ended up with Iguodala. The Magic ended up with Vucevic, Mo Harkless, the Sixers' first-round pick in 2017, Aaron Afalo, Al Harrington, Josh McRobertson, Chris Iyenga, and the Nuggets' 2014 first-round pick. So the Magic were really the ones that made out in this deal, and were the winners of the trade. The draft picks didn't necessarily pan out, but Vucevic would become an all-star and basically the face of the Magic for a few years there, and kept them somewhat competitive, even though they never really got over the hump. Now, before we get into how those other 3 failed, the Lakers didn't really make out too well. The Nuggets only had Iguodala for 1 year, and he ended up going to Golden State, which worked out for them. But this is a Philly-based podcast, so what happened in Philly? Well, if you think back, and you can look it up because there is video of this. I watched it, and I can only get it so far because it was fresh. The Sixers had just been bought by Josh Harris and that group, and they had this huge introductory press conference welcome party at the Constitution Center for Bynum and Richardson. And it was over the top. It was insane. But we, as Sixers fans, ate it up. Oh my God, did we eat it up. Like, it was, you would have thought the second coming of Jesus. The way people went nuts. People were trying to get into the Constitution Center to see it. And just everybody, because we felt and really thought that this was the missing piece that we needed. And basically now you got Bynum and Holiday, and we knew that Drew Holiday was a solid point guard who could shoot. He wasn't a Batman. So now we got Batman. Holiday can be Robin, and then you got the other pieces. What we did not know at the time was, I think everybody knew that Bynum had knee problems because that's why he missed his time. What we didn't realize is just how much fluid the big man lacked in his knee because of all the injuries. He did start getting injections. It didn't work. I don't know whether they were like cortisone injections or what. So he went to Germany to get orthokine treatment. And this is something that Kobe Bryant did later in his career that actually helped him out and made him, kind of prolonged his career somewhat. And basically, I don't know exactly what the medical term is, but ultimately they take your blood out, do something, and then put it back in, and like it somehow is supposed to heal everything. And I don't know. I mean, the fact that the dude was missing fluid in his knee, so it was like bone on bone. I don't know if that is like, I don't know. Like, I'm not a medical person. Maybe somebody out there can leave a comment and explain it. But either way, he went to Germany to do this in the hopes that he could get on the. And this is all taking place between August and the beginning of training camp, which is usually late September. But then things got weird. Like, yeah, weirder than going to Germany to have your blood taken out and re-injected into you for healing purposes. It got weirder. It just seemed like every update we received was, oh, it's going to be another 2 to 3 weeks before he can start practicing. Oh, he's still sore. He needs more this. The left knee's good, but the right knee still needs more. So you got another round of injections in the right knee to help it heal. And then things got really weird. All of a sudden, if I'm thinking back, and I wanted to keep this as organic as possible. That's why I didn't do the extensive research I probably would do. But if I remember, there was like a grainy video or a picture or something of him at the bowling alley. I'm pretty sure it wasn't North Bowl. It was Lucky Strike down in Center City. And apparently he re-hurt his knee by bowling. And at that point, I think we all realized this dude's never going to play for the Sixers. Which ultimately he didn't. He sat out that year, ended up, I think he played like 20-some games for like Cleveland, I think, after that. And just never was the same player. I mean, to this day, the dude's only 33 years old. Had that first contract with the Lakers, and I mean, he got some of the money from the Sixers for that year that he didn't play. And it just never worked out. We never got our Batman to the Robin. After that, I mean, things really kind of spiraled differently for the Sixers. It was the final straw for whatever that regime was. Ultimately, to the end of an era. And I would say that like that post Iverson Sixers run in 2000, 2001 to the beginning of the process was the NBA purgatory era for the Sixers, I think you could call that. Tony DeLeo, who was the GM, he's probably like the third or fourth GM during that. Like, they had like a lot of general managers. I know Billy King, and then DeLeo, and then there was somebody else in there too. So like they didn't have any consistency, and they were just trying to kind of piecemeal it together to keep them in purgatory for the most part. Doug Collins was like, I'm out. Like, he resigned, I think it was like March or April of that season. But it led to Sam Hinkie being hired, who then hired Brett Brown, which started the process. And in a way, it sort of started the whole, I mean, and it was already there, of the Sixers drafted guys who had some sort of injury questions and then let them sit out a season. Joel, Markel, Ben. So, like, these guys are getting drafted and then sitting out a year because they're like, all right, this is what the process is. And it depends on how you want to look at it, of whether the process at the time, and look back in our archives, I do have a whole process episode where we talk about it. Whatever you want to say about the process, they were in purgatory anyway. So they weren't going to get higher than probably a 6 seed. They weren't going to get lower than like the 8th or 9th pick in the draft unless they got lucky like they did. And even the one time they got lucky, it was Evan Turner. I mean, so it was a win-win for the Sixers to bring in, or I guess you could call it a lose-lose, but to bring in Bynum, excuse me, they took a chance, and they had no choice at this time, and ultimately it would have led, or it did lead to the process. Now, the what-if portion of this is, what if his knee did get better? What if those injections that he had in Germany actually worked and he had an extended career in Philly? Would they have been good enough? I don't know. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. I mean, I don't think they would have won this year, but with Bynum and Holiday, all of a sudden, it's kind of like you cut out the whole process, and now maybe people are going to want. Now, this is all contingent upon re-signing Andrew Bynum as well. But had they re-signed him, and then people started to see, and they're like, "Oh, I'll come play with Drew Holiday and Andrew Bynum." Is it possible that the whole process doesn't happen, and in some alternate universe, the Sixers become like, I don't know, the Bucks almost, like on a parallel sort of path? Does Sam Hinkie not ever get a job? Is Brett Brown still one of the assistants with Greg Popovich in San Antonio? Where does Joel go? Does anybody draft Joel because of the injury history? Is Ben Simmons a shooter and one of the best players in the NBA? We'll never know. But all of that could have happened if Andrew Bynum's knees were healthy. Or the shots he took in Germany worked. Or maybe if he didn't go bowling. All right, so there's just too many. This is a whole frustrating part. But again, like I said, there's a whole generation out there who just look at this as like a little blip, and they're like, the Sixers are what they are, blah 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 blah. But they don't know how exciting it was that day when Andrew Bynum was introduced at the Constitution Center, and we thought, hey, here we go, we're going to compete in the East. And I think they would have. They would not have beaten the Heat at the time, but they could have hung with Chicago. They could have hung with any of the other teams, Cleveland. So, what are your thoughts on Bynum? Was he a necessary piece to get us to the process? Because I guess that's the other way to look at this at the what if. If he came in and played but was okay and not great, which the Sixers at this point had a history of overpaying for guys and overvaluing guys. If they bring him in and he plays, but they don't necessarily get over the hump, does Doug Collins stay? Does Tony DeLeo, does he still get to be the GM? And then if he does, where does that leave the Sixers? Do we ever get Brian Colangelo coming in? Do we ever get Doc Rivers? There's just so many different ways, and that day at the Constitution Center was one of the most pivotal moments in Sixers history, recent Sixers history, because of the direction the team went after that and then to where we are now. So let me know, how important or how big of a role is Andrew Bynum? A guy who never played for the Sixers, by the way, never played in a preseason game for the Sixers, but yet plays such an important and vital role in the history of this franchise. And I'll ask this again before I asked at the beginning of this podcast. How else would they have gotten out of purgatory? Like, there really was no path. They were stuck. So, I didn't ask this, but I mentioned being in purgatory. So I asked you, how could they have gotten out of purgatory without the process? And again, I told you, go back. There's multiple episodes about the process and the history of the Sixers and the way things went. But nobody has given me a reason or a way that they could have gotten out of purgatory. And they still probably would be there. They'd be like the Atlanta Hawks. Maybe they get a guy like Trae Young and then trying to build pieces around him, and then you're back to the end of the Allen Iverson era. So how could they have gotten out of purgatory? And I think they swung for the fences with Andrew Bynum because they had to. I think DeLeo was trying to save his job, and he knew the only way to save his job was for Andrew Bynum to pan out. And then the other question, the other thing that maybe nobody really wants to think about, are we starting to head down that purgatory path again with the Sixers? And should they possibly, and I know nobody wants to talk about this, but with the way they are with the contract situations, we don't know what's going to happen with James Harden, is now the time to possibly, I'm not saying I agree with this or we should, but it could be time this season to maybe trade the big guy and get a massive haul of draft picks and things like that while he's at his peak, so we don't end up down purgatory. Let me know what you think about that as well. Be sure to like and subscribe this podcast. Tell a friend. Just keep spreading the words. Go check out our friends at Philly Goat as well as 2008 Phils. Be sure to check out my daily podcast, This Day in Philly Sports History, every day. In August, we're going down the 31 questions in 31 days about the 2023 team, getting you ready for the opening of the season. Be sure to check out our archives here on Back to the Future. There's a few good Sixers ones that, again, if you ever start, young people out there, if you ever start feeling great and feeling on your high horse about being a Philly fan, go listen to a podcast so you can get knocked back into reality and know that this little 25-year blip. Now, if I'm sitting here 25 years from now doing a podcast and now we've had a 50-year run, then maybe I'll believe it. But until then, go check out the archives. Be sure to follow me on YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Jimbo_Mont, Instagram, Philly Jimbo. If you're on Spotify, be sure to check out the question in the poll. If you're not, let me know what you think. How could the Sixers have gotten out of purgatory back then before the process? And are they heading down the same path now? And is the answer to get rid of Joe now? Why his value is at the highest? Let me know. Go have yourselves a week. We got some Eagles preseason football this week. Hopefully everybody stays healthy. There's a couple battles I'm interested in looking at to find out which ones. Be sure to listen to This Day in Philly Sports History every day. Be safe out there, people. Have a great week. This has been Back to the Future. I'm Jim Montgomery, and until next time, I will see you when I see you.